Millionaire abandons his wife, and 5 years later finds her with a child identical to him at the bus terminal. Jack Morrison strode hurriedly through the crowded bus terminal in downtown Chicago. His designer Italian suit was immaculate, and he gripped a leather briefcase containing crucial documents to close the most important deal of his career. The noise of announcements and conversations around him faded to a distant echo as a feeling of emptiness consumed him. Everything he had achieved in his life, success, fortune, recognition, now seemed insignificant as he faced a truth that had been buried for over 10 years. Suddenly, a sight stopped him in his tracks. Sarah Foster, a woman with long brown hair, was walking while holding the hand of a boy about 10 years old. The child had piercing green eyes and messy blonde hair, a younger version of himself. Jack felt his heart begin to race, and a cold sweat ran down his back. He had left Sarah more than a decade ago, blinded by ambition and promises of a life full of luxury and power. He never knew that shortly after he left, she discovered she was pregnant. Now, before him, was what he had lost: a son. Sarah, feeling a gaze upon her, turned and her eyes met Jack's. Time seemed to stand still. Her face paled, and her hand instinctively tightened around her son's. "Mom, who's that man?" asked the boy, noticing the sudden tension. Sarah, trying to maintain her composure, responded with a trembling voice, "No one, sweetheart, come on, we'll be late." But Jack couldn't let them go. Taking a step forward, his voice hoarse with emotion, he called out, "Sarah, wait, please." Sarah stopped, closing her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. She turned slowly towards Jack, protectively placing the boy behind her. "What do you want, Jack?" she asked, her voice a mixture of pain and anger. Jack, his gaze fixed on the child and could barely articulate, Is he my son?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah, with tears forming in her eyes, nodded almost imperceptibly. "Mom, what's he talking about?" The boy tugged at Sarah's sleeve, confused and scared. Jack took another step forward, extending a trembling hand towards the child. "Hello, Don't you dare!" Sarah interrupted sharply. "You have no right." "Not after all this time." The shock on Jack's face was evident. "Sarah, please, I need to talk to you, to explain." "Explain what, Jack? How you abandoned us? How you decided your career was more important than us?" Sarah struggled to keep her voice low, aware of her son and the people around them. Jack, desperate, pulled a card from his pocket. "Here, please. It's my number. Call me when you're ready to talk. I'm begging you." "Sarah." Sarah looked at the card as if it was something poisonous but finally took it. Without saying another word, she turned and quickly walked away with the boy. Jack stood there, motionless, watching as his unknown son disappeared into the crowd. The briefcase he was holding, a symbol of everything he had worked for, now seemed to weigh a ton. At that moment, his phone began to ring insistently. It was his assistant, reminding him of the important meeting he had in half an hour. Jack looked at the screen, then in the direction Sarah and the boy had disappeared, and made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. "Cancel everything," he said into the phone. "I have something much more important to attend to." With determination in his eyes, Jack Morrison took the first step on a path that would lead him to confront his past and fight for a future he never knew he wanted. Chapter 2: Secrets and Lies. Sarah Foster arrived at her modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, her mind still reeling from the unexpected encounter with Jack. Her son, Ethan, hadn't stopped asking questions during the entire ride home. "Mom, who was that man? Why were you so angry with him?" the boy persisted. Sarah sat heavily on the sofa, trying to find the right words. "Ethan, honey, it's complicated. That man is someone I knew a long time ago." Before she could say more, the door opened and in walked Mike, Sarah's current husband, and the man Ethan had known all his life as his father. "Hey, family," Mike exclaimed cheerfully, but his smile faded when he saw Sarah's worried expression. "What's wrong, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah glanced at Ethan and then at Mike, feeling the weight of the secrets she had kept for so long. "Mike, we need to talk. In private." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Jack found himself in his luxurious penthouse, pacing back and forth like a caged lion. His assistant, Lisa, watched him with concern. "Mr. Morrison, are you sure you want to cancel the meeting with the investors? This deal could mean millions for the company." Jack stopped and looked out the window towards the city skyline. "There are more important things than money, Lisa. I just discovered I have a son." Lisa stifled a gasp. "A son? But how is that possible?" "It's a long story," Jack sighed, "one that begins with the biggest mistake of my life." Back in Sarah's apartment, Mike listened in shock as she revealed the truth about Ethan's biological father. "Are you telling me I've raised another man's son for 10 years? Mike's voice trembled with disbelief and pain. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, pleaded, "Mike, please, understand. When I met you, I was alone and scared. You gave Ethan a father's love. You are his father in every way that matters." Mike stood up, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. "I need air. I can't process this right now." As he left the apartment, Ethan, who had been eavesdropping, entered the room with eyes full of tears. "Mom, doesn't Dad love me anymore?" he asked, his voice trembling. Sarah hugged her son tightly. "No, my love, Dad loves you more than anything in the world. It's just that things are complicated right now." In his office, Jack began a frantic investigation. Using his connections and resources, he soon discovered more about Sarah and Ethan's life. He learned about Sarah's marriage to Mike, about the school Ethan attended, his hobbies and likes. But what impacted him most was discovering that Ethan had a congenital heart condition that required constant medical attention. Jack's heart clenched at the thought of all he had missed, how he hadn't been there for his son when he needed him most. Determined to make things right, Jack made a decision. He called his lawyer. "I need you to prepare everything. I'm going to claim my rights as a father." The lawyer, surprised, Baz warned, "Mr. Morrison, you must consider the implications. This could turn into a very public legal battle. Your reputation, your company." "I don't care," Jack interrupted. "I've made many mistakes in my life, but I'm not going to make the mistake of abandoning my son for a second time." As night fell over Chicago, 4 tormented souls struggled with the consequences of long-kept secrets and past decisions. Sarah, trying to console a confused son. Mike, walking aimlessly through the streets, questioning everything he thought he knew. Ethan, trying to understand a world that had suddenly become strange and scary. And Jack, determined to make up for lost time, so no matter the cost. What none of them knew was that their lives were about to intertwine in ways they could never have imagined, unleashing a storm of emotions, divided loyalties, and shocking revelations that would shake the foundations of everything they believed they knew about love, family, and forgiveness. Chapter 3. The storm approaches. The next morning dawned grey and threatening over Chicago, as if the sky itself sensed the emotional storm that was about to break. Sarah hadn't slept all night. Sitting in the kitchen, with a cold cup of coffee between her hands, she stared fixedly at the card Jack had given her. Mike hadn't returned home, and the silence in the apartment was deafening. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, startling her. With her heart racing, Sarah opened the door, expecting to see Mike. Instead, she found herself face to face with Jack. "What are you doing here?" Sarah whispered, nervously looking into the apartment, fearing that Ethan might appear at any moment. Jack, with dark circles under his eyes that revealed he hadn't slept either, responded in a soft but firm voice, "We need to talk, Sarah, about Ethan, about us, about everything." Before Sarah could respond, a child's voice resonated from inside. "Mom, who is it?" Ethan appeared behind Sarah, his green eyes, so similar to Jack's, opened with curiosity and a little fear as he recognized the man from the bus station. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. "Hello, Ethan. I'm an old friend of your mum's." Sarah, feeling she was losing control of the situation, quickly intervened. "Ethan, honey, Why don't you go to your room for a moment? I need to talk to Mr. Morrison. Reluctantly, Ethan obeyed, but not before casting a final curious glance at Jack. Once alone, Sarah confronted Jack. You can't just show up like this. I have a life, a family that I should be part of, Jack replied, with a mixture of pain and determination. Sarah, I know I made a terrible mistake by leaving, but now that I know about Ethan, I can't simply ignore it. I have rights. Rights, Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling by the... What rights do you have over a child you abandoned before he was born? My... every way that matters. Jack took a step back, hurt by Sarah's words, but not willing to give up. I know I don't deserve to call myself his father, but I want the chance to be one, to be there for him to... His words were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Mike entered, his face a mask of exhaustion and confusion. Upon seeing Jack, his eyes lit up with a mixture of recognition and fury. You must be the biological father, Mike said, his voice dangerously calm. Jack nodded, extending a hand in a gesture of peace. I'm Jack Morrison. But Mike ignored the outstretched hand. I don't care who you are. Ethan is my son. I've raised him. I've loved him. I've been there for every important moment of his life. Where were you? The tension in the air was palpable. Sarah, standing between the two men, felt her world crumbling around her. Please, she pleaded, let's not do this here. Ethan might hear. As if her words were a prophecy, Ethan's bedroom door slowly opened. The boy came out, his eyes full of tears and confusion. Di, what's going on? He asked in a trembling voice. Why is everyone fighting? The three adults froze, each suddenly realizing the damage their confrontation could be causing to the child they all claimed to want to protect. Jack, feeling that his presence was only making things worse, took a step back. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble. I'll go, but this isn't over. We have to resolve this, for Ethan's sake. With one last longing look at his son, Jack left the apartment, leaving behind a deafening silence. Sarah knelt in front of Ethan, trying to hold back her own tears. Honey, there are things we need to explain to you, complicated things about your family. Mike, still struggling with his own emotions, joined them. Ethan, no matter what happens, I want you to know that I love you. You're my son, regardless of anything else. As the small family tried to navigate this impossible conversation, Jack walked the city streets, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and plans. He took out his phone and dialed a number. Lisa, I need you to call an emergency meeting with the legal team and cancel all my commitments for the next few weeks. This is going to be a long battle. Chapter 4. Hearts at War. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and confrontations. Jack, determined to be part of Ethan's life, initiated legal actions to establish his paternal rights. The news fell like a bomb on Sarah and Mike's life. How dare he? Mike shouted, holding the legal notification in his trembling hands. After all these years, does he think he can just show up and claim Ethan as if he were property? Sarah, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands, felt torn. On one hand, she understood Jack's desire to know his biological son. On the other, she feared this would destroy the life they had built. Ty, we have to think about Ethan, she finally said. All of this is affecting him more than he shows. Indeed, Ethan had become quieter and more withdrawn since learning the truth about his biological father. At school, his teachers noticed a change in his behavior, becoming more distracted and sometimes irritable. Meanwhile, Jack faced his own challenges. His decision to fight for Ethan had sent shockwaves through his business empire. Investors were nervous, fearing the scandal could affect the company's value. Mr. Morrison, his chief advisor, warned during a tense meeting, "You must consider the ramifications of your actions. This custody battle could cost you everything you've built." Jack, looking out his office window at the city sprawling beneath him, responded with a determination that surprised even his closest collaborators. If I have to choose between my empire and my son, I choose my son. We'll find a way to handle this. But the universe had other plans. That same afternoon, while Ethan was playing in the park under Sarah's watchful eye, the boy suddenly collapsed, clutching his chest. "Ethan!" Sarah screamed, running towards him. The boy's face was pale, his breathing labored. Within minutes, the sirens of an ambulance filled the air. As the paramedics attended to Ethan, Sarah, with trembling hands, dialed 2 numbers, Mike's and, after a moment of hesitation, Jack's. At the hospital, the 3 adults found themselves in the waiting room, united by their concern for Ethan, but separated by an abyss of resentment and guilt. The doctor attending to Ethan came out with a grave expression. "Ethan's heart condition has worsened. He needs urgent surgery, but it's a complicated and expensive operation." Mike, his voice breaking, asked, "How much does it cost?" "We'll sell the house if necessary." Before the doctor could answer, Jack intervened. "I'll take care of all the expenses, whatever is necessary to save my son." The word "my" didn't go unnoticed by Mike, who turned to Jack with barely contained fury. "Your son. Now he's your son. Where were you when he needed a father all these years?" Sarah, feeling the situation was about to explode, intervened. "Enough. This isn't about you. It's about Ethan. He needs us united, not fighting." Her words seemed to penetrate the fog of anger and resentment. For a moment, the 3 looked at each other, recognizing the truth in Sarah's words. The doctor, observing the dynamic, added, "There's something else you should know. Due to the nature of the surgery, we'll need to perform compatibility tests for a possible blood donation. It would be ideal to have both fathers available for testing." This revelation added a new layer of complexity to the situation. Mike and Jack looked at each other, understanding that, whether they liked it or not, they were both vital to Ethan's survival. As the doctor withdrew, leaving the 3 adults in a silence charged with emotions, Sarah looked at both men and said firmly, "For Ethan's sake, we have to find a way to work together. No matter what happened before, now the only thing that matters is his well-being." Mike and Jack, still reluctant but aware of the gravity of the situation, nodded slowly. At that moment, faced with the possibility of losing Ethan, legal battles and personal grudges seemed insignificant. What none of them knew was that this medical crisis would be just the beginning of a series of events that would test their loyalties, challenge their convictions, and possibly lead them to redefine the meaning of family. Chapter 5: Hidden Truths. The days in the hospital became a tense truce between Mike and Jack, with Sarah as a reluctant mediator. Ethan, oblivious to much of the adult drama, struggled with his own confusion and fear about the impending surgery. One afternoon, while Mike had gone home to fetch clean clothes for Ethan, Jack found himself alone with the boy for the first time. Nervous, he sat down next to the hospital bed. "Hey, champ," he said softly. "How are you feeling today?" Ethan looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Does the surgery hurt a lot?" Jack's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his son's voice. "The doctors are very good at what they do. They'll put you in a deep sleep. And when you wake up, you'll be on your way to feeling much better." There was a moment of silence before Ethan asked, "Is it true that you're my dad? My other dad?" "I mean," Jack felt a lump in his throat. "Yes, it's true. But I want you to know that Mike is your father in all the ways that matter. He has loved and cared for you your whole life." "Then why weren't you here?" The question, simple and direct, hit Jack like a punch. "I made a very big mistake," he answered honestly. "I was scared and selfish, but I want you to know that, if you give me the chance, I'd like to be part of your life, not to replace Mike, but to love you too." Before Ethan could respond, Sarah entered the room. Seeing the scene, she stopped, unsure how to proceed. "Mom," Ethan called, "did you know Jack wants to be my friend?" Sarah looked at Jack, surprised by the approach he had taken. "Is that true?" Jack nodded. "If Ethan allows it, I'd like to be part of his life in whatever way he's comfortable with." This moment of understanding was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Thompson, Ethan's cardiologist. His expression was grave. "I need to speak with you," he said, looking at Sarah and Jack. "In private." In the doctor's office, Dr. Thompson gave them the news that would change everything. "We've completed the compatibility tests for blood donation," he began, "and we've discovered something unexpected." Sarah and Jack exchanged worried looks. "According to our analysis," the doctor continued, "Mr. Morrison is not Ethan's biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah staggered, clutching the edge of the desk to keep herself upright. "But that's impossible," she mumbled. There has to be a mistake." Jack, pale as a ghost, looked at the doctor. "Are you sure? Couldn't it be an error in the tests?" Dr. Thompson shook his head. "We've repeated the tests several times to be sure. There's no doubt." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, looked at Jack. "I swear I don't understand. There was never anyone else." Jack, still in shock, nodded slowly. "I believe you, Sarah. But then, who is Ethan's father?" Dr. Thompson, uncomfortable but aware of the medical importance of the situation, intervened. "Given that neither Mr. Morrison nor Mr. Carter are compatible for donation, we'll need to look for other options." "Is there any other relative who could be the biological father?" Sarah shook her head, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Suddenly, a distant and blurry memory began to take shape in her mind. A party, one drink too many, a confused awakening. "Oh my God," she whispered, the color draining from her face. I think I know what happened." Jack looked at her, a mixture of concern and curiosity in his eyes. "Sarah, what is it?" But before Sarah could elaborate, the office door burst open. Mike entered, his face a mask of fury and pain. "I heard everything," he said, his voice trembling. "What the hell is going on here? What truth are you talking about?" Dr. Thompson, Sarah, and Jack looked at each other, aware that they were on the brink of a revelation that could destroy everything they thought they knew about their past and their future. Sarah, gathering all her courage, stood up. "Mike, Jack, there's something I need to tell you. Something that happened a long time ago, something that even I didn't understand until this moment." As Sarah prepared to reveal a long-buried truth, Ethan's heart monitor in the adjacent room began to sound with an urgent alarm. Fate, it seemed, was not willing to give them even a moment's respite in this storm of revelations and emotions. The sound of Ethan's heart monitor alarm shattered the tension in Dr. Thompson's office. Within seconds, medical staff flooded the boy's room, while Sarah, Mike, and Jack watched helplessly from the hallway. "My baby!" Sarah cried, trying to enter the room, but was held back by a nurse. "Please, Mom, let the doctors do their job," the nurse said firmly but compassionately. The minutes dragged on like hours as they waited for news. Mike and Jack, despite their animosity, found themselves united in their concern for Ethan. Finally, Dr. Thompson emerged from the room, his face tired but relieved. "We've stabilized Ethan, but this only reinforces the urgency of the surgery. We need to find a compatible donor as soon as possible." Sarah, wiping away tears, nodded. I think I know who Ethan's father might be." Mike looked at her, the pain evident in his eyes. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Sarah took a deep breath. 11 years ago, right after Jack left me, I went to a party to try to forget my pain. I drank too much and I woke up in a hotel room, not clearly remembering what had happened. Jack and Mike looked at her in shock as she continued with a trembling voice. "I always assumed it had been a blurry night with Jack before he left, but now I think something else happened that night." "Are you saying that someone took advantage of you?" Jack asked, anger growing in his voice. Sarah shook her head, confused. I don't remember clearly, but I remember a face, a man I knew from college. Alex Vega." The name fell like a bomb in the hospital hallway. Mike, who had been listening in silence, suddenly paled. "Alex Vega? The owner of Vega Pharmaceuticals?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, surprised. "Yes, how do you know?" Mike ran a hand over his face, visibly disturbed. Vega Pharmaceuticals is one of the main drug suppliers for this hospital. In fact, the experimental treatment that the doctors want to use for Ethan, it's one of their products. Dr. Thompson, who had been listening to the conversation, intervened. This could be crucial for Ethan's treatment. If Mr. Vega is truly the biological father, he could be compatible for the donation we need. Jack, who had been processing all this information in silence, finally spoke. How'd we have to find him? For Ethan? Sarah looked at the two men who had been part of her life in such different ways. I can't face him alone. Not after all these years. Mike, despite the pain and confusion he felt, took Sarah's hand. You're not alone. We're in this together, for Ethan. Jack nodded in agreement. I'll use my contacts to locate Vega. We'll bring him here, whether he wants to or not. As the trio prepared to face this new and shocking reality, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Lisa, Jack's assistant, approached with a look of concern. Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice low and urgent. There's something you need to know. I've been investigating as you asked, and I've discovered something about Alex Vega that could complicate things even more. Jack, Sarah, and Mike looked at each other, aware that they were about to dive even deeper into a labyrinth of secrets and lies. But with Ethan's life at stake, they knew they had no choice but to move forward, no matter how painful the truths they might uncover. Speak, Lisa, Jack said, bracing himself for the worst. What have you discovered about Vega? Lisa looked nervously around before responding in a low voice. Sir, Alex Vega isn't just the owner of Vega Pharmaceuticals. He's also your half-brother. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack felt the ground move beneath his feet, while Sarah and Mike looked at him with a mixture of shock and confusion. My half-brother, Jack stammered. But that would mean that Ethan is your nephew, Sarah completed, her voice barely a whisper. The revelation fell on them like an avalanche, restructuring everything they thought they knew about their relationships and the past. As they processed this new information, Ethan's monitor sounded again, reminding them that no matter how complicated the situation became, the boy's life was still hanging by a thread. With renewed determination, Jack straightened up. It doesn't matter who Vega is or how he's related to me. What matters is saving Ethan. We're going to find him and get that donation, whatever it takes. As the group prepared to face this new challenge, none of them could imagine the even more shocking revelations that awaited them, nor how these hidden truths would change their lives forever. Chapter 7. Blood Ties. The search for Alex Vega became a race against time. Jack used all his contacts and resources to locate his newly discovered half-brother, while Sarah and Mike took turns staying with Ethan, whose condition remained precarious. Finally, after days of frantic searching, Lisa burst into the hospital room with news. "We've found him," she announced, breathless. "Alex Vega is at a medical conference in Miami. We can have a private jet ready in an hour to go get him." Jack nodded, his face a mask of determination. "I'll go. I have to face him face to face." Sarah stood up. "I'm coming with you. I need answers as much as you do." Mike, although visibly uncomfortable, nodded. "I'll stay with Ethan. Bring him back, no matter what it costs." As Jack and Sarah prepared to leave, Dr. Thompson entered with a grave expression. "Our time is running out. Ethan's condition is worsening. We need that donation in the next 48 hours or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood what was at stake. Hours later, Jack and Sarah found themselves at the luxurious Miami hotel where the medical conference was being held. After convincing the hotel staff, they finally found themselves in front of Alex Vega's suite. Jack knocked on the door, his heart pounding. After a moment that seemed like an eternity, the door opened. Alex Vega was a distinguished-looking man, with the same dark hair and penetrating eyes as Jack. Upon seeing them, his face went from confusion to recognition, and then to shock. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Then, looking at Jack, he added, "And you must be Jack Morrison. I've followed your career." brother. Jack, taken aback by the immediate recognition, took a moment to respond. We need to talk, Alex. It's about... The boy, Alex interrupted, his voice laden with emotion. I know all about Ethan. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes full of confusion and pain. How? Have you known all this time? Alex invited them in, his face a mixture of guilt and resignation. Sit down, please. It's time you knew the whole truth. Once inside, Alex began his story. That night, 11 years ago, it wasn't an accident, Sarah. I had been watching you since college. I was always in love with you, but I never had the courage to tell you. Sarah brought a hand to her mouth, horrified. Jack clenched his fists, struggling to contain his anger. Alex continued, his voice breaking with emotion. When I found out Jack had left you, I saw my opportunity. I followed you to that party and I took advantage of the situation. What I did is unforgivable. I know. Why didn't you say anything all these years? Jack demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Alex lowered his gaze. At first, it was cowardice. Then, when I found out about the pregnancy, I panicked. I used my connections to keep myself informed about Ethan to make sure he was okay. Even the experimental treatment, Sarah interrupted, suddenly understanding. You developed it for him, didn't you? Alex nodded. Yes, I've dedicated my life to creating a treatment that could save him, hoping somehow to make up for the damage I had caused. Jack stood up, unable to contain his fury any longer. Make up for it? You think that makes up for what you did to Sarah? What you've done to all of us? Sarah, however, had other more urgent concerns. Ethan needs you, Alex. He's dying. He needs a compatible blood donation, and you're his only hope. Alex's face transformed into a mask of pain and conflict. There's something else you need to know, something that changes everything. Jack and Sarah looked at each other, wondering what other bomb was about to drop on them. Alex took a deep breath before continuing. Ethan. Ethan is not my biological son. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah staggered, leaning on the back of a chair to keep from falling. What are you saying? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Alex, with tears in his eyes, explained, That night, at the party, I wasn't the only one who was with you, Sarah. There was someone else, someone who had also been watching you from the shadows for years. Sarah, pale as a ghost, could barely articulate. Who? Alex looked directly at Jack before answering. Our father, Sarah. Jackson, my father. He is Ethan's true biological father. The revelation fell on them like lightning, restructuring everything they thought they knew about their lives and relationships. Jack collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had just discovered. Sarah, struggling to process this new information, looked at Alex with a mixture of horror and desperation. But then, who can save Ethan? Alex, with a determined expression, responded, I can. Despite not being his biological father, I am his uncle, and I've spent the last years developing a treatment specifically for his condition. Let's go back to Chicago immediately. There's no time to lose. As they prepared to return, each of them knew that nothing would ever be the same. The revealed truths had shaken the foundations of their lives, but they had also opened the door to a possible salvation for Ethan. With time against them, and a labyrinth of emotions and secrets to navigate, the group rushed to the airport, aware that the real challenge was just beginning. The fight for Ethan's life was about to enter its most critical phase, and with it, the future of everyone involved hung by a thread. Jack's private jet cut through the night sky, carrying aboard a group of people united by a devastating secret and a desperate mission. Sarah looked out the window, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Jack, seated across from her, kept his eyes closed, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. Alex, for his part, worked frantically on his laptop, reviewing medical data and protocols. We'll be landing in 20 minutes, the pilot announced over the intercom. Sarah turned to Alex. Are you sure your treatment will work? Alex looked up from his computer, his eyes tired but determined. "I've dedicated my life to developing it. It's Ethan's best chance." Jack opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on his newly discovered half-brother. Why do all this if you knew you weren't the father?" Alex sighed deeply. "At first, it was out of guilt. But over time, I realized that even though he wasn't my biological son, I loved him as if he were. I wanted to protect him, to save him." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of Sarah's phone. It was Mike. "Sarah," his voice sounded urgent, "the doctors say Ethan is getting worse. They need to start the treatment in the next few hours or—" "We're arriving," Sarah interrupted, struggling to keep calm. "Tell them to hold on a little longer." As the plane began its descent, Jack leaned towards Sarah. "What are we going to tell Mike? Ethan?" Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of the truth crushing her. "I don't know. How do you explain to a child that his grandfather is actually his father, that his whole life has been a lie?" "Not his whole life," Alex gently corrected. "The love that all of you have given him, that's real." The landing and the trip to the hospital passed in a blur of movement and anxiety. Upon arrival, they found Mike pacing nervously outside Ethan's room. "Did you bring him?" he asked, before noticing Alex's presence. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who is he?" Sarah took Mike's hand. "It's a long story. The important thing is that he's here to help Ethan." Before they could explain further, Dr. Thompson appeared, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Vega, thank you for coming. We need to start the treatment immediately." Alex nodded, following the doctor to the laboratory. Jack, Sarah, and Mike were left behind, the weight of unrevealed secrets hanging between them. "What aren't you telling me?" Mike asked, his voice tense. Sarah and Jack exchanged looks, knowing they couldn't hide the truth much longer. "Mike," Sarah began, her voice trembling, "there's something you need to know. About Ethan, about his real father." As Sarah and Jack revealed the truth to Mike, Alex worked frantically with the medical team to prepare the treatment. The hours passed, each minute crucial in the fight for Ethan's life. In the waiting room, Mike collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by the revelations. All this time, how could this happen? Jack, feeling equally lost, responded, "None of us knew, but what matters now is Ethan." Suddenly, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. An older man, distinguished-looking and authoritative, was advancing towards them, followed by a retinue of bodyguards. Jack stood up, recognizing him instantly. "Father," he said, his voice a mixture of shock and contained rage. The man, William Morrison, patriarch of the family and, as they now knew, Ethan's biological father, looked at them all with an indecipherable expression. "I've come for my grandson," he declared, his voice resonating in the hallway. "Or should I say my son?" Sarah stood up, confronting the man who had destroyed so many lives. "You have no right to be here. Not after what you did." William looked at her with a mixture of arrogance and something that could have been remorse. "I have every right. I'm the only one who can save Ethan now." Before anyone could respond, Alex came running from the laboratory, his face pale. "The treatment. It's not working as we expected. We need a compatible donor immediately." All eyes turned to William, who smiled with a mixture of triumph and sadness. "As I said, I'm the only one who can save him, but I have my conditions." The group suddenly found themselves at an impossible moral crossroads. Ethan's life hung by a thread, and the man who could save him was the same one who had caused so much pain and destruction. As Ethan's heart monitor emitted increasingly erratic beeps, the tension in the hospital hallway reached its peak. The decisions they would make in the next few hours would not only determine Ethan's fate, but would also redefine forever the meaning of family, forgiveness, and redemption for everyone involved. Chapter 9. The Price of Forgiveness. The silence that followed William Morrison's words was deafening. Sarah, Jack, Mike, and Alex looked at the patriarch with a mixture of desperation and revulsion. Ethan's life hung by a thread, and the man who could save him was the same one who had caused so much pain. "What conditions?" Jack finally asked. his voice tense. William looked around, his eyes stopping on each of those present. I want Ethan to bear the Morrison name, to be publicly recognized as my son and heir. Sarah stepped forward, fury evident on her face. How dare you? After what you did, you think you can just claim Ethan as if he were property? It's the only way, William replied, his voice cold and calculating. Either you accept my terms or I leave, and with it the only chance to save Ethan. Mike, who had remained silent, processing everything he had discovered, finally spoke. You can't do this. Ethan is my son. I've raised him. I've loved him. But he's not your blood, William interrupted. And right now, my blood is the only thing that can save him. Alex, desperate about Ethan's medical situation, intervened. Ike, we don't have time for this. Every minute that passes, Ethan gets weaker. We need to make a decision now. Jack looked at Sarah, seeing the conflict in her eyes. Sarah, I know it's an impossible decision, but I know, she said, tears running down her cheeks. For Ethan, we'll do whatever is necessary for Ethan. With a heavy heart, Sarah turned to William. We accept your terms, but with one condition of our own. You will have no contact with Ethan unless he wishes it when he comes of age. William considered the proposal for a moment before nodding. I accept. Now, let's proceed with this procedure. As William was taken to the laboratory to prepare for the donation, the rest of the group remained in the hallway, the weight of their decision falling upon them. Mike, visibly devastated, walked away without saying a word. Sarah made a move to follow him, but Jack gently stopped her. I'll go, he said. I think we need to talk. Jack found Mike in the hospital chapel, sitting silently in front of the altar. Have you come to gloat? Mike asked bitterly when Jack sat down beside him. Jack shook his head. I've come to tell you that regardless of what a DNA test says, you are Ethan's true father. You've loved him, cared for him, been there for him in every important moment. That's what really matters. Mike looked at him, surprised. Why are you telling me this? Because it's the truth, Jack replied. And because I believe Ethan is going to need everyone who loves him to get through what's coming, including you. Especially you. Jack's words seemed to penetrate Mike's shell of pain. Slowly, he nodded. Thank you, he said simply. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, William was preparing for the donation. Sarah, observing the procedure, couldn't help but ask, why? Why did you do what you did that night? William, for the first time, showed a crack in his facade of coldness. Because I was jealous. Jealous of the life Jack could have, of the freedom he had to love. I never had that. My marriage was arranged, my life dictated by others' expectations. That night, I lost control. It's not an excuse, I know, but it's the truth. Sarah looked at him, seeing for the first time the man behind the monster. What you did is unforgivable, she said, but for Ethan's sake, we'll find a way to move forward. Hours later, the group gathered again outside Ethan's room. Dr. Thompson came out, his face showing cautious optimism. The treatment seems to be working, he announced. The next 24 hours will be critical, but there's hope. A collective sigh of relief ran through the group. Sarah collapsed into Mike's arms. While Jack and Alex exchanged looks of caution and hope, William, pale but erect, approached Sarah. I've fulfilled my part. I hope you'll fulfill yours. Sarah nodded gravely. We will. But remember, Ethan's well-being will always be our priority. As William walked away, escorted by his bodyguards, the group remained silent, aware that although they had won a battle, the war was far from over. What now? Alex asked, expressing the question everyone had in mind. Jack, looking through the window into the room where Ethan slept, responded, Now we begin to rebuild, for Ethan, for all of us. As night fell over the hospital, the group prepared to face an uncertain future. They knew that the revealed secrets and promises made would change their lives forever, but they also knew that, united by their love for Ethan, they would find the strength to face any challenge that fate might have in store for them. The real test, they realized, was not just saving Ethan's life, but learning to live with the consequences of their actions and decisions. The path to forgiveness and redemption would be long and difficult, but they were willing to walk it, step by step, together. The days following Ethan's treatment were an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved. The boy showed signs of improvement, but his recovery was slow and fragile. Sarah barely left his side, while Mike, Jack, and Alex took turns offering support and company. A week after the intervention, Dr. Thompson called a meeting with the family. "Ethan is responding well to the treatment," he announced with a tired smile. "We believe he's out of danger, although he'll still need constant care and follow-up." A collective sigh of relief ran through the room. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, hugged Mike and then, to everyone's surprise, "Jack, thank you," she whispered. "All of you. Without your help, Ethan wouldn't have made it." Alex, who had been observing from a corner, stepped forward. "Sarah, there's something else you should know. The treatment I developed. It's not just for Ethan. It could help thousands of children with similar conditions." Jack looked at his half-brother with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "What exactly are you saying?" Alex took a deep breath before continuing. "I want to donate the patent for the treatment to a non-profit foundation, a foundation we could create together in Ethan's name." The proposal fell like a bomb in the room. Mike was the first to break the silence. "Why would you do something like that? It must be worth millions." Alex smiled sadly. "Because it's the right thing to do, because I want something good to come out of this whole situation, and because I want to be part of Ethan's life, in whatever way possible." Sarah and Jack exchanged glances, silently communicating before Sarah spoke. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said softly. "Ethan would be proud to know his experience is helping other children." Jack nodded in agreement. "I can help with the legal and financial aspects of the foundation. We could do something really important here." As they discussed the details of the foundation, Mike remained silent, his face a mask of contained emotions. Finally, he stood up and left the room without saying a word. Sarah made a move to follow him, but Jack gently stopped her. "Let me talk to him," he said, before going after Mike. He found Mike on the hospital roof, looking out at the city skyline. "It's too much, isn't it?" Jack asked, approaching. Mike nodded without turning. "My whole life, everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, has crumbled in a matter of days." Jack stood beside him, sharing the view. "I know, but Mike, none of this changes who you are to Ethan. You're still his father in all the ways that matter." Mike finally turned to look at Jack, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "How can you say that? You, Alex, even William. You all have more right to Ethan than I do." Jack shook his head firmly. "The right to a child isn't earned by blood, Mike. It's earned by love, by presence as by sacrifice, and in that no one can compete with you." Jack's words seemed to penetrate Mike's shell of pain. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed. "What are we going to tell Ethan?" Mike asked, expressing the fear they all shared. Jack sighed deeply. "The truth eventually, but in his own time when he's ready. For now, what he needs is to know that he's loved, that he has a family that supports him, no matter what." Mike nodded slowly. "I guess we'll have to learn to be a very unconventional family." Jack smiled slightly. "The best families usually are." Meanwhile, in Ethan's room, the boy finally woke up completely for the first time since the intervention. His eyes, still drowsy, focused on Sarah. "Mum," he whispered weakly, "I had a very strange dream. There were a lot of people arguing about me." Sarah gently stroked his hair. "Shh, my love, everything's okay now. You're safe and you're going to get better." Ethan looked around the room, noticing the flowers and balloons. "Where's Dad? And who are all those people who have been coming?" Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to navigate this delicate conversation. "Dad's here, honey. And the other people. They're family who came to help you get better. You have a lot of people who love you, Ethan." The boy's eyes lit up with curiosity. "More family? Like cousins and uncles?" Sarah smiled, tears of relief and love in her eyes. "Something like that, my love. When you're a little stronger, I'll introduce you to all of them. For now, just focus on resting and getting better, okay?" Ethan nodded, his eyelids already heavy with sleep. "I love you, Mum," he murmured before falling asleep again. "I love you too, my life. More than you'll ever know," Sarah whispered, gently kissing his forehead. At that moment, Jack and Mike returned to the room, followed by Alex. Seeing Ethan sleeping peacefully, a sense of unity enveloped them. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew they would face the future together, united by their love for this boy who had changed their lives in ways they never imagined. Ethan's recovery would be just the beginning of their journey. The revealed secrets, the promises made, and the bonds formed in those critical days would lay the foundation for a future none of them could have foreseen. A future full of challenges, yes, but also of possibilities, forgiveness, and above all, love. Chapter 11. Truths and Consequences. The months following Ethan's recovery were a period of adjustment for everyone. The foundation, christened Brave Hearts, in honor of Ethan and all children fighting heart diseases, was in full development. Jack and Alex worked tirelessly to establish it, while Sarah and Mike focused on Ethan's recovery. One sunny afternoon, as Ethan played in the garden of Sarah and Mike's house, the boy asked a question that everyone feared but expected. "Mom, why do Uncle Jack and Uncle Alex come to the house so much? And that older man who came the other day, who was he?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Mike, who nodded slightly. They had discussed this moment and knew they couldn't postpone it any longer. "Ethan, honey, there's something important we need to tell you," Sarah began, sitting next to her son. "It's about our family." With patience and care, Sarah and Mike explained to Ethan a simplified version of the truth. They told him about how Jack was his biological father, how Alex was his uncle and had developed the treatment that saved him, and how Mike, although they didn't share blood, was and always would be his dad. Ethan listened in silence, his young mind struggling to understand. "But does that mean I have two dads?" Mike knelt in front of Ethan, taking his small hands in his own. "It means you have a lot of people who love you, champ. More than most people have, and I'll always be your dad no matter what." Ethan nodded slowly, processing the information. Then, with the innocence typical of a child, he asked, "Can I have 2 desserts today since I have 2 dads?" Sarah and Mike couldn't help but laugh, relief flooding them. Ethan's adaptability and resilience constantly surprised them. However, not everyone was handling the situation with the same grace. William Morrison, true to his word, had kept his distance, but his influence was felt in every aspect of their lives. The press had begun to speculate about the Morrisons' sudden interest in medical charity, and rumors about a secret heir began to circulate. One night, as Jack worked late at the Foundation's office, he received an unexpected visit from his father. "Impressive, what you've accomplished here," William said, observing the plans and documents scattered across the desk. Jack visibly tensed. "What do you want, Father?" William sat down across from his son, his face a mask of calm. "I want to meet my grandson, my son, properly this time." Jack felt anger growing inside him. "We agreed you wouldn't have contact with Ethan until he was of age and wanted it." "Circumstances have changed," William replied coldly. "The press is asking questions. We need to control the narrative before it gets out of hand." "The narrative?" Jack almost shouted. "This isn't one of your businesses, Father. We're talking about a child's life." William stood up, his voice laden with authority. "A child who carries my blood, my legacy. You can't keep me away forever, Jack. Sooner or later, the truth will come out." As William left the office, Jack stood looking out the window, aware that the fragile peace they had built was about to be challenged once again. The next day, Jack called an urgent meeting with Sarah, Mike, and Alex. He told them about William's visit and his demands. "We can't let him near Ethan," Mike said, his voice trembling with contained rage. Sarah, always the voice of reason, intervened. "But we can't keep this secret forever either. If the press is investigating, it's only a matter of time before they discover something." Alex, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Maybe we should consider telling our story on our own terms." Everyone looked at him in surprise. "Think about it," Alex continued. "How we could use the media attention to promote the foundation, to talk about the importance of medical research and family support. We could turn this situation into something positive." Jack nodded slowly. "It makes sense. But what about Ethan? How do we protect him from all this?" "We protect him by staying united," Sarah responded firmly, "by being honest with him and with each other, by showing him that, no matter how complicated our situation is, our love and family are the most important things." As they discussed the details of how to handle the situation, one thing became clear. The life they had known was about to change dramatically once again. The decision they would make would not only affect their lives, but also Ethan's future, and the legacy they would leave through the foundation. With the weight of these decisions on their shoulders, the group prepared to face their greatest challenge yet, presenting their truth to the world and, in doing so, redefining the meaning of family in everyone's eyes. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Jack, Sarah, Mike, and Alex worked tirelessly to prepare a communication strategy that would protect Ethan while telling their story to the world. They decided to organize a press conference at the headquarters of the newly formed Brave Hearts Foundation. The morning of the conference, the tension was palpable. Ethan, aware that something important was happening, approached Sarah as she was getting ready. "Mom, are you sad?" he asked, his green eyes full of concern. Sarah knelt in front of her son, gently caressing his cheek. "No, my love, I'm a little nervous, that's all. Today we're going to tell our story to a lot of people." "Our story?" Ethan tilted his head, curious. "Yes, honey. About how our family is special and different, about how so many people love you and how that helped you get better." Ethan seemed to reflect for a moment before smiling. "Can I help tell the story?" Sarah felt her heart swell with pride and love. "Of course you can, my brave boy. Together, okay?" Meanwhile, in another room, Jack and Mike were having a tense conversation. "I'm not sure I can do this," Mike admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You must stand in front of all those cameras and admit that you're the best father Ethan could have," Jack interrupted. "Mike, listen to me. You are his father in all the ways that matter. Nothing we say today will change that." Mike looked at Jack, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Slowly, he nodded. "Thank you, Jack. I think I finally understand why Sarah fell in love with you once." The two men shared a smile of mutual understanding, the last vestige of animosity between them fading away. As the time for the conference approached, one last surprise awaited them. William Morrison arrived, accompanied by his usual entourage. "What are you doing here?" Jack asked, visibly tensing. William, for the first time, seemed unsure. "I came to offer my support and to ask for forgiveness." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah, who had entered the room with Ethan by her hand, was the first to speak. "Mr. Morrison, we appreciate your gesture, but you must understand that forgiveness isn't something that can be demanded or expected. It's earned with actions, not words." William nodded, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "I understand, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn a place in Ethan's life." Ethan, sensing the tension in the air, stepped forward. "Are you my other grandfather?" he asked innocently. William, visibly moved, knelt to be at the child's eye level. "Yes, Ethan, I'm your grandfather, and I hope that someday you can give me the chance to get to know you." The scene was interrupted by Lisa, Jack's assistant. "It's time," she announced softly. The group headed towards the hall where the press was waiting. Before entering, they stopped for a moment. Sarah took Mike's hand, who in turn put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Jack and Alex flanked the group, with William a few steps behind, respecting their space. "No matter what happens in there," Sarah said, looking at each of them, "we're a family, complicated, different, but a family nonetheless." With one last collective breath, they entered the hall. The camera flashes momentarily blinded them, but they remained united. Jack approached the podium, his voice firm as he began to speak. Thank you all for coming. We're here today to tell a story of mistakes and redemption, of secrets and truths, but above all, a story of love and family. As Jack spoke, detailing the events that had led them to this moment, the cameras captured the reactions of each member of this unusual family. The determination in Sarah's eyes, the pride in Mike's posture, the calm on Alex's face, and the mixture of remorse and hope in William's expression. But it was Ethan who stole the show. When it was his turn to speak, he approached the microphone without fear. "I don't understand everything that happened," he said with the honesty typical of a child. "But I know I have a lot of people who love me. I have 2 dads, an uncle who saved my life, and now a new grandfather, and my mum, who's the best in the world. I think that makes me very lucky." His words provoked laughter and tears among those present. At that moment, in front of the cameras and the world, the true essence of this family was exposed, imperfect, complicated, but united by unconditional love. The press conference marked a before and after in their lives. The headlines the next day ranged from "Unconventional Family Revolutionizes Medical Research" to "The Morrisons, Secret Heir, a Story of Redemption." In the months and years that followed, the Brave Hearts Foundation grew to become a world reference in research and treatment of childhood heart diseases. Jack and Alex led the expansion, using their connections and resources to make a real difference in the lives of thousands of children. Sarah and Mike maintained their relationship, strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Jack found his place as a constant presence in Ethan's life, always respecting Mike's primary role as father. William, true to his word, worked tirelessly to earn a place in Ethan's life and repair his relationships with Jack and Alex. Over time, he became a loving grandfather and an invaluable ally for the foundation. Ethan grew up surrounded by love and support, facing the challenges of his medical condition with courage and optimism. His story inspired many, becoming a symbol of hope for other families facing difficult situations. Years later, at the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Brave Hearts Foundation, the family gathered again. As they watched Ethan, now a healthy and happy teenager, give a speech about the importance of family and unconditional love, each reflected on the path they had traveled. They had begun as strangers united by secrets and lies, but through forgiveness, understanding, and unbreakable love, they had become a true family. A family that had learned that the strongest bonds are not always those of blood, but those forged through trials and time. And so, in that moment of triumph and reflection, they understood that the real miracle had not just been Ethan's recovery, but the way their story had transformed their lives and those of so many others. They had paid the price of forgiveness, and in return, they had gained something invaluable: a family united by love, truth, and hope for a bright future.